My name is Braxton. I'm part of the solutions engineering team here at Mezmo. Been with them for about 2.5 years or so. I was a data consultant prior to this. And for like the last 6 months or so, my main focus has been on telemetry pipelines. Prior, log analytics and all that. But with this transition, this has been our largest focus as a company. And so going in, again, quick recap, telemetry pipeline sits in between all these generators of your logs, your metrics, your traces, and your downstream observability tools or your storage platforms or whatever it happens to be, giving you the ability to transform it, to control it, to route it, to really add value there, whether it's through optimizing for cost or whether it's for actually adding value to enrich the data, to make it more useful, to transform, like Tucker said, to your compliance. So you're sending the data into your SOC and it's in the proper format. It's actually able to be used. Our approach, though, we come from a fundamental tenet, though, of we believe that a lot of these customers, you don't necessarily understand your data. There's an aspect of it where SRE teams are controlling and being asked to manage systems that they didn't necessarily write. Code pushes, you have a new team is pushing a new change, the logs themselves now drift and change, and you have different input, different aspects of the system that you have to actually maintain, ensure that it's up and running and you're meeting your SLAs and all that. But you didn't necessarily write it, so how are you supposed to know what data is being sent your way? When it changes, how are you supposed to know what can you take advantage of? What's at your fingertips? And so I'm going to jump in to our platform, and one of the first places that our customers start is, let's go ahead and do this, into our data profiler. So what I have here is a pipeline. We're going to get into the pipeline in just a second, but this is the high-level summary view of it. And what we've actually done is, in real time, we're taking this data and we're figuring out what are your templates, what is the patterns that you have here, who are your heavy hitters, what kind of data is even at your fingertips. So to your point earlier, where there's this misunderstanding, this allows you to go in and take an intelligent lens to see what's in your data. Now I don't have to scroll through a bunch of logs. I don't have to go into my Splunk and check through all my indexes. Instead, I can say, these are the patterns we have. Now, what you're seeing here is actually an internal use case that we did. We took our data from an API proxy service that we have. We're pulling it in, and this is really, really incredibly useful for our company to be able to ensure that our service is up and even running, that you're able to send data, it's able to transfer through. But there's a lot of noise that we've noticed, and it's been something that we haven't necessarily taken the line to yet to be able to go and optimize, but this seemed like an excellent opportunity for us to see how can this data profile apply to our own internal use case. So we ran this through our system. We got a summary of the different patterns, and at the very, very top, you're able to see a summarization of the templates that you have. So here you can see the very top one, you've got filling buffer bytes. Maybe it's useless, maybe it's not. This can allow you to say, okay, have an intelligent conversation with the engineers who wrote this code, or be able to go in and know what you're looking for. In addition, in particular, our dev team was able to identify that there is this balancer-enabled piece, which is required for our team to be able to, it's essentially a health check, but it's excessively noisy. If you see here, this is over the course of just like an hour or so, you have 147 million events, essentially of the same thing, redundant over and over again. You need it to make sure that things are still there, but do you actually need it at that fidelity? And same thing with here, we have other ones where you have events that are broken up. You have this add spooler zero-fold batches, which essentially goes in and lets us know how things are being added for the proxy, how they're being backed up and spooled in the back end. But it's little partial events, and you can roll these things up and to have a full summary instead, and you can reduce from 144 million to a couple thousand, which we'll see in just a few minutes of how we actually take a pipeline and apply it to these different use cases. Now, the data itself is live. As Tucker mentioned, we're dealing with data in motion. We're not necessarily storing anything in the platform. There's a cache. We're going to make sure we don't drop data. It's a fundamental tenet that, when we bring data in, it's going to make it to its destination the way that you had planned and intended. So to that end, there's a lot of redundancy in the back end, but nothing's stored for long term. You don't have a day, a month, or any of that kind of stuff outside of some of these high levels. But it's being continuously updated as data drifts. We're introducing things like alerting so you can be aware that, hey, this add spooler zero-fold batches has actually changed. It's no longer that message anymore. It's no longer in that format. Your Grok parser or one of your auto parsers that we provide is no longer applying to it, and you need to go in and take some action. So alerting, being able to be aware of those things is a big piece. And beyond that, once you go in here, one of the big questions as an engineer is like, what do I even do? And so out of the box, we'll provide some of these recipes that go through and provide, and you'll see in just a few minutes through our visual UI, how these things work. But we'll give you essentially a skeleton that you can go in, take advantage of these, apply them to your own data, tweak it as you need, but we'll find intelligent ones that are useful based on the data that you're sending in. And so now that you've seen a bunch of this over level, this high view, let's go see what a pipeline actually looks like. So if I go in, we're jumping into our dev reduction. And so this is essentially a pipeline that's sitting in between that data. You're having your source bringing in information. We can see here if we tap it, we're able to grab information as it passes through. You see there's a lot of information, a lot of raw value, but going through and trying to figure out what patterns, what data you have by just looking at the raw data can be an extremely difficult task for engineers. Slow task too, where you instead have things that you need to fix, make sure it's not broken, but you're spending time trying to understand what the heck was even sent my way. So with that in mind, our engineering team applied some of our processors through routing, filtering, reducing data down, transforming, parsing through Grok, things like that, to go in and reduce this data. And so I'm going to show you what's happening here. As we have the data flowing through, we're first identifying which app is this even running through. So in this case, we're saying, hey, which app, your BZP logs. We're narrowing that piece down. In this case, that's where the add spooler event was. We go back there, you'll be able to see that it was the BZP. But it's essentially just a very high-level individual version. So we're going to parse first through a Grok pattern to just pull this data out. If I tap into here, depending on whether or not, since this is live, we'll see, okay, we're good to go. We do have actual data. This line, though, has this add 0 full batches. You have 2 lines in partial. We want to know how many lines total is actually in the spool. And so we're going to go in first, parse out what is the actual number, the integer, the number of lines, which spooler is this. Then we're going to change the format a bit through, we have scripting, so you can introduce JavaScript, do your own transformations, that kind of stuff. But in this case, we're just standardizing this data. And then we're going to reduce it down, which basically means roll it up. You're going to take 100 events, 10 events, 1,000,000 events over a period of time, and you're going to roll them into a single entity. So you're reducing down the data while keeping the fidelity and having the full control to go in and say, hey, I want to group by app, host, or any other field that you have pulled out of your data. And what I want to do is I want to keep the last of the lines. I want to sum up the total spooler lines, so I'm not getting these individual pieces, I'm getting a total count, while keeping the last of the spooler as well, and start time, end times. You can preserve whatever you would like when it comes to this. Whether you're keeping the last value, whether you're rolling them up to an array, whether you are summing, averaging it doesn't necessarily matter. You're able to then take that data, though, and roll it down. So that if we see here, this is going over 30 seconds, and I guess we'll see if the demo gods are in my favor. If we tap this one, within about 30 seconds, we're going to see the result of having this data rolled up. So as we go in, you're able to see that the message itself has been rolled up. You have 0. You have a total number of 136 lines. We're keeping the actual data intact. And then we're able to, again, craft it, do whatever we'd like. So in this case, I'm going to put it into a format that my observability, my logging platform can take advantage of. In this case, it's the Mezmo logging analysis, but you're welcome to tap into any number of our destinations, which I'll go over in just a few seconds. Moving the nulls and then dumping it down. All of this is through a UI that if I go into the edit piece, is very simple to easy to add, to control, and to understand, hey, I need to add some processors. I need to apply some of our different pieces, whether it's encrypting data, whether it's going in and using the Grok to identify that this is your PII that's been flagged. And now I need to go and encrypt this data, or I need to drop it out completely. All of these pieces, though, are through a very approachable UX, where an SRE, but you also have business units who can go in there. If you're able to do the Excel, if you have, I'm sure at every company have plenty of very intelligent people who aren't necessarily coders. This is something that becomes approachable. You can go in and tap into that data and bring the business value out. Outside of there, though, it's not really all about the UX, obviously. It's very nice to make it easy to go, but behind all this is Terraform, and you're able to go in and apply this at code and at scale across your enterprise. So what we found is mostly teams will go in, you'll play around and explore in our UI, be able to prototype something out, but to share it with the team and to really do this at scale, obviously your engineers won't code. 99% of the time, that's what they're going to want to be able to do this at scale. So applying all these principles, all these tools allows you to really optimize, reduce, control this data. And in this case, I know this looks kind of complex, but essentially we're only doing like 3 or 4 things here. We're dropping out unnecessary data, we're spooling up, we're sampling some. In this case right here, we're actually taking individual events, log messages, and we're turning them into an event metric is what we call it. It's just essentially, let me turn this into a signal. Let me put a number, whether it's the count, let me pull a value out of the event, let me just do, hey, this has even just occurred, and turn it into something that I can then pass downstream to my Prometheus or to my Splunk or to whatever.
So you're actually seeing the output as you're phasing through. So as you continue to reduce, at that point,
Correct.
You're at this part of the pipeline. That's fantastic.
Yeah. We have on the back end, as you can imagine, there's quite a bit of stats and things that we're pulling out. And so as this product was launched in May, a lot more of that information is going to be serviced to the user where you don't necessarily know just that the data is coming through, but how much data is actually going through there. What's your volume or your rate that's flowing through these different things to be able to go and optimize. If we go into the monitoring view, you kind of see that we have some of this at the top, and you can see I have this much ingress, I have this much egress. Granted, this is a smaller set that we did for the cloud field day, where this is just a single pipeline where we go through and do this dev reduction. But outside of all this, there is another flip side to it as well. So yes, you can go and optimize your data, you can go and control it, but you want to be able to respond, right? Things change, data drifts, but also systems change. Systems break and things sometimes are on fire. When they are, your data pipeline needs to be able to respond as well. And so going in and actually taking, in this case, we're in normal mode, we can put it into an incident mode, triggered through an API from your observability tool, from different thresholds that you've defined and set, and you can say, hey, data was flowing this way. Now actually, because we're in an incident, I need to grab all my debug logs. I need to grab all my info. I need to grab all the data that I was dropping before and pass it into my SIEM for a period of time. That gives you the control to be able to know when that event occurred. You have the full fidelity that you need at the time that it's happening, as opposed to waiting 3 hours till your engineering team finds out, and then you got to go back and recreate those logs. You got to go back and figure out how the heck to even get your finger on the pulse. So this is built in right now. You can see that there's these state router pieces where I'm checking to see, is it normal, is it incident, or is it some other state that the user can define. But I'm going to switch over to the SIEM handler one because it's a little more digestible to see what this actually means in practice. So if I jump into here, you can see that I'm bringing in, this is essentially the exact same source. I've just pointed at this one as well. And this case, though, we're only outputting about 7 megabytes. All I'm doing in this case, and this is a toy problem, obviously. This can be applied to any of your flows. You can get much more complex, but essentially we're looking at the level. And I'm saying, hey, if I'm an error or a critical or severe or anything like that, I'm going to say it's an error. Otherwise, it's going to be these different ones. In a normal mode, my info, I'm going to sample it. My unmatched, I'm also going to sample it. And debug, we're not even going to log that because things are running fine. This is in prod, and I don't necessarily need debug today. But when I trigger and I flip this over to incident mode, in this case, I can do a toggle down, but there's an AP on the back end. You'll see that it changes a little bit, but the data now is flowing through here. So if we tap in, we'll see the incident, and you'll see that data is actually bypassing all the routing, all the filtering, and just putting everything into my SIEM. I need all my data right now. Whereas before, it was, and I'll switch this back off incident, you'll be able to see. In normal mode now, no data is flowing through because I'm checking to see, hey, what state am I? I'm currently incident, or I'm currently normal, or whatever the user has defined or called these different states. So here, no data going through. When we're done with the incident, it gets triggered again through an API call, or, I mean, obviously a human can go and do this manually, but that's not as scalable when you have something that's broken at 3 a.m. So let me click, go back to normal mode. And if we go to the actual, close this out, now we can see that in that normal that I was watching and tapping, data is now flowing through. So the paths have changed. The flow is completely different based on the state of the system itself. Being able to go up here, you can see that there's this little spike. It goes up, can left it on if we wanted.
What can you do around contextualizing in time, like a time machine view? Because as we know, observability is, as much as we think about it, as preventing the future from going wrong, it is telling us what the past did badly. Right. And so we get to call it 5 a.m., but the problem happened at 3 a.m. So how do we like sort of slide and say like, this is when the problem space occurred, and then what other event happened that could have caused or correlated to this thing happening?
So answering those questions is where a lot of this functionality is built out. Because to answer those questions, you need the data.
Right.
If you were dropping it before, but that's going to take an intelligent lens of knowing what your data looks like. So using the profiler to go in, understand that you have X, Y, Z to play with. And then you can start to intelligently as a company make decisions, say, okay, this is what we need under this circumstance, this is what we don't. To be able to trigger those things, one common way we have, if you've bought into observability tools like Datadog or Splunk or any of those, I'm sure your teams have plenty of, hey, crap's on fire. And you can make an API call through a very simple REST API from there that then switches your incident over within your telemetry pipeline and the data comes in. So you can set these up if you, with a little forethought, to at 5 a.m. handle it for you, to grab that data, switch over, to flip over. Outside that, Tucker mentioned things like rehydration. We have a lot of teams who instead they'll go in, they'll take their data and they'll say, okay, all of this I actually need to add to S3, or I need to dump this down into my Kafka topic, or put it into some downstream system for long-term storage. If you have it into S3, you can then use something like an SQS signal to pull that data back in at any time. So when you find out at 9 a.m. when you go into the office that things broke at 5, I can go back, trigger a call, and pull that data back in retroactively if we happen to not miss it and we didn't set these up. And then when you do that, you can build out different flows to handle this in the future and make sure you never run into that issue again.
So as I'm thinking as a deployment team, it's actually an SRE heaven, right? You say, we're going to do a deployment at X hour. So 2 hours before, as part of your deployment pipeline, you kick up, log the hell out of it,
right?
Let it run, and then 2 hours after, unless there's a systemic error, continuous errors, then you can actually dial your pipeline back and stop capturing all the goop.
It's definitely I can't tell you how many times I've dealt with teams.
I was going to say that's one of our core log management use cases was troubleshooting, deploying, debugging.
Yeah.
The other thing we're looking at too is having like a 1 to 7 day buffer. And whether that needs to be searchable or not outside, like a lot of this can happen in observability tools, but to your point, when you're troubleshooting, sometimes you want to see what was the whole stream coming through. And so again, it's not there yet, but it's like a replayable, which is different than a rehydratable 4 hour, 6 hour, 1 day, 7 day buffer. We're not like certain of what to do, but we have the capabilities to maintain that buffer and replay it. We just haven't put it in the UI yet. So, yeah.
Well, you say it's based on the fact that with good data, you can build intelligence. If you don't have the core data, then you're basically picking a sample selection, and nothing you do will not be buried in bias.
That's right.
And it's really, really tough to get past that. So I love the idea that you could like super enrich your data when needed, but you can also then manage that pipeline on demand. That's pretty cool. Yeah, great work. And the UI looks slick.
Teams really worked hard on it, that's for sure. The dynamic piece especially, I can't tell you how many times I've run into that kind of problem with our prior legacy product, the log analysis, when you didn't have this dynamic piece, and it's a pain. Data's gone at that point.
Do you have a custom configuration language, or is this going to like output an HCL or something?
All of this, it's going to be based on Terraform. So you'll go in, it's going to be a YAML file to set these things up. When you have the actual scripting processors, that's through JavaScript in that case. We're looking at, my vote's Python. I don't know if I'll be able to convince some people to get to that point, but right now it's JavaScript.
Thanks, because I'm very curious. Really good presentation, and really good that you kind of brought up the problems and the challenges and what the tool actually solves. And I really like the incident mode, like switching between the normal and incident mode. Super interesting feature. And regarding that, I had like a question that I also see some tools are attempting to solve, at least. Is if you have any smartness in the tool to kind of detect the anomalies that are happening based on kind of the behavior that it learned from the systems, and then switch itself kind of to the incident mode. Like, okay, I see that something's going on that is not normal. It sounds like an incident. So let's do the switch.
Our headspace is definitely leaning towards there. This is something that we released back in May. The dynamic piece in particular is very new for our company. We released in like the last month or so. There's a lot of data on the back end though that we're tracking and watching. Being able to take a more intelligent lens is a huge focus of our product team. So being able to go in and say, okay, we've detected that things are switching out. You're detecting that your errors are spiking. It's in a weird state. Maybe you should do something, and providing guidance to teams is an area that we're investigating. But we, to some degree, take AI with a grain of salt. We want to make sure that when we're applying these things, that they're applied in a very intelligent way, that they are useful. So, for instance, the profiling piece, that's using a machine learning algorithm, essentially. So you could say that's AI right there, but it's in a very small directed and targeted area that we find huge use. And so we want to make sure any other tools we bring to the table are going to be the same. Right now, we're interested in working with teams to find out what kind of the patterns, what kind of situations do you need to be able to trigger on so we can build out those flows and make it more applicable. Right now, we have all the Lego pieces you need underneath, but adding into that is going to be something you see coming out.
Yeah, and Christina, I'd add to that one of the ways we think about that is from an alerting perspective, and as we continue to enhance the alerts that happen in the system, they can trigger the event that moves it into incident mode. So right now there's more, oh good, I'm on camera. Right now there's more sophistication in terms of like triggering incident mode in external tools, like a Sentry, for example, or someone like that might go trigger an external, or Honeycomb might trigger an external incident, and then we would take that in, but our alerts will be able to do that too as we continue to enhance those capabilities.
Okay, so you can actually through the tool also do the kind of the triggering in the other system that is connected.
We can trigger for others. We could send both ways. But like what would be interesting to us is something like, I don't know, CPU spikes consistently for a period, not once, but consistently for a period of 5 minutes. That fires off an alert that might alert someone, but also alert our tool that like we're potentially in an incident. We might want to switch into that mode for a period of time.
Cool.
That's a wildly simple example, but illustration.
Oh, that makes sense. Thanks.
Thank you. Just a quick one from me. Great presentation. You guys are hitting great niche, in my opinion. Like,
Awesome.
you know, what I've seen with all the like observability products, like I know Logic Monitor, you know, Datadog, the log patterns is definitely something which they are like a little bit missing, or it's not that like, you know, DevOps. So great niche, great product. Just a quick one. You've mentioned Terraform loads of time. Are you guys looking at the sort of like, you know, I know it was a big buzzword, the event-driven infrastructure and all that stuff. Like, you know, like we were always talking about what if then the operator will do. Like, what if you would sort of like extend that pipeline into something more automated and it will be a little bit more like event-driven? And also the other way around, Terraform as one of the sort of the inputs into all these logs. So like you are digesting sys logs, you know, Kubernetes and all this stuff. Are you thinking about maybe integrating with the Terraform cloud and stuff like that?
You know, I'm not sure I can speak to if we're looking into the Terraform cloud in particular. But when it comes to applying all of these, we chose Terraform because it's industry standard. We run into teams, and 9 times out of 10, that's what they want to use. So that's what we went with first. On the back end, though, to be able to go in and understand that data, you know, you can tap into the syslog, you can do your whole setup through there if you'd like. But the data itself, it's kind of interesting. You mentioned that profiling piece at first. We did it more as a one-off with our R&D and found huge success with a lot of these companies because these observability tools are expecting you to understand your data. They're expecting you to know they're going to own it, they're going to control, but they would expect that you're going to be the expert going in. We're not always the expert. Instead, you've got teams who are extremely intelligent in their space, their area, but they're not dealing with components that they haven't touched, that they haven't messed with before. And so giving you these lenses, this line into it has been something that we've yet to run into a customer that is not, you know, chomping at the bit to get access to this early. And so I know that you had a second question as well.
I just add to that, Braxton kind of sweeps up the second question too, is like one of our challenges as a company, especially being 5 months into the journey of actually having this out in the wild, is it's a platform that's capable of doing so many things. Like all the primitives are there to do pretty much. Like we did very little of this is set for like dedicated flows. It's all set for like, you know, massive ultimate flexibility through the primitives. And so we haven't explored those things yet, but if we see customer demand, it's a generic answer, but like we've kind of accounted for the massive amounts of use cases that this could cover.
Yeah.
That's what we did initially, then we realized we need to focus a little bit because it's to consume. So we're very focused right now on like getting that that initial customer value, but we imagine the platform ultimately evolves into a new control point within the enterprise that is basically like almost like an operating system of its own for real-time data, which is going to have bidirectional feeds into all those areas.
Great.
So,
yeah.